Chosen one, you didn't meet Jay by accident. You felt it the moment your path began to tilt. The second your heart started whispering something wasn't right. Right when you were about to choose what looked easy but felt heavy, Jay appeared like a quiet interruption to your momentum. Not loud, not forceful, just present enough to shift your awareness. And now you're here, replaying every detail, wondering why that moment felt different, why their presence lingered longer than logic allows, and why something deep inside you refuses to call it coincidence. Because it wasn't coincidence, it was intervention. You were seconds away, not just from a decision, but from a direction that would have slowly taken you further away from yourself. And the dangerous thing about that path, it didn't look wrong at first. It looked comfortable, familiar, maybe even exciting. But deep down, something in you hesitated, something in you resisted. That quiet resistance wasn't fear, it was truth trying to speak. Before you made a choice your future self would have to fight to undo. And that's when Jay entered. Not to control you, not to save you in the way stories often exaggerate, but to interrupt the illusion you were about to step into. Jay didn't come with answers, they came with presence. A presence that made you pause. A presence that made you question. A presence that somehow made you see what you were ignoring. Think about it. Out of all the moments in your life, why then? Why not earlier? Why not later? Because timing like that is never random. It's precise. It's designed. It's aligned with the exact second your soul needed a mirror, not a map. You weren't meant to be told what to do. You were meant to feel the shift within yourself. And Jay became the catalyst for that shift. You felt it in the way your thoughts slowed down when they were around. You felt it in the way your usual patterns didn't feel as convincing anymore. Things that once seemed certain suddenly felt questionable. It's not confusion that's awakening. And awakening doesn't always feel peaceful at first. Sometimes it feels like disruption, like discomfort, like everything you thought was solid suddenly becoming unstable. But that's because truth doesn't always arrive gently, it arrives honestly. Jay didn't change your path, they revealed it. Before them you were moving fast, maybe too fast to notice the signs you had been ignoring. The small warnings, the subtle misalignments, the quiet voice inside you that kept saying, this isn't it. But you kept going because stopping felt harder than continuing, until you couldn't ignore it anymore. Until Jay made it impossible to ignore. And now you're left with questions, not just about them but about yourself. Why did their words hit differently? Why did their silence feel louder than others' noise? Why did their presence feel like both comfort and confrontation at the same time? Because they didn't come to fit into your world. They came to challenge. And that's what makes their role so powerful. They didn't need to stay forever. They didn't need to explain everything. Their purpose wasn't permanence, it was precision. To arrive at the exact moment you were about to drift too far from your truth, and to bring you back to awareness. Some people enter your life to walk with you. Others enter to wake you up. Jay was the wake-up call. You may not have understood it in the moment. You may have even resisted it. Maybe you questioned their intentions. Maybe you doubted the connection. Maybe you tried to convince yourself it didn't matter. But it did. Because something shifted in you after that encounter. Something irreversible. You started seeing things differently. You started feeling more deeply. You started questioning what you once accepted without thought. And that's the mark of a divine interruption. It doesn't leave you the same. It's easy to overlook moments like this, to reduce them to coincidence or timing or chance. But deep down you know better. You felt the weight of that moment. You felt the significance. You felt the way everything seemed to pause just long enough for you to notice what you were about to miss. That kind of timing doesn't come from randomness. It comes from alignment. And alignment only happens when something greater is at work behind the scenes, placing people, moments, and experiences exactly where they need to be, not for your comfort, but for your growth. You are about to choose wrong, not because you're careless, not because you're weak, but because you're human. Because sometimes the wrong choice doesn't look wrong until it's too late. That's why intervention exists. That's why Jay showed up when they did. Not to judge you, not to fix you, but to reflect something back to you that you were about to lose sight of, yourself. And now the question isn't why they came. The real question is, what are you going to do with what they revealed? Because moments like that don't repeat the same way twice. They leave an imprint, a quiet knowing that stays with you long after the person is gone. A sense that you were redirected even if you didn't fully understand it at the time. And maybe that's what's been unsettling you. Not their presence, but the truth they exposed. The realization that you were closer to making a choice that didn't align with who you really are. The awareness that you were about to ignore your own intuition. The understanding that without that interruption you might have gone down a path that would take much longer to recover from. That realization can feel heavy. But it's also powerful, because now you see, now you feel. Now you know what you didn't know before. And that changes everything. It changes how you move. It changes what you tolerate. It changes what you choose next. Because once you've been awakened, even slightly, you can't fully go back to being unaware. That's the gift hidden inside the disruption. Jay didn't stay to guide every eye. They didn't need to. Their role was never to walk the path for you, it was to remind you that you have the awareness to choose it differently. And now, you're standing in that awareness, not where you were before, not as uncertain as you felt then, but in a space where you can finally see the difference between what feels right and what simply looks right. And that difference is everything. Because the life you're meant to live isn't built on appearances, it's built on alignment, and alignment requires honesty. The kind of honesty that Jay brought into your life without even trying. The kind that made you stop mid-thought and question everything you were about to accept. The kind that doesn't force you but frees you, and maybe that's why you can't forget them. Not because of who they were on the surface, but because of what they activated within you. They didn't just enter your life. They revealed a version of you that was about to be silenced by the wrong choice. And now that version is awake. And now that version is awake, it's not going to quietly go back to sleep just because things feel easier when you ignore it. That awareness has a pulse now. It moves through your thoughts when you're alone. It echoes in your decisions when you hesitate. And it gently but persistently asks you to choose with intention instead of impulse. You might have tried at first to shake it off. To go back to the version of yourself that didn't overthink, that didn't question every direction, that didn't feel the weight behind simple choices. But something had already shifted too deeply. Once clarity enters, even in the smallest form, it begins to expand. And the more you try to silence it, the louder it becomes, not in noise, but in knowing. That knowing is what Jay left behind. Not answers, not instructions, but awareness. And awareness changes the way everything feels. Suddenly, what once excited you feels off. What once felt normal starts to feel misaligned. Conversations that used to flow easily now feel forced. Paths you once walked confidently now feel uncertain beneath your feet. That's not you losing yourself. That's you finding yourself in a deeper, more honest way. Because before this moment, before that perfectly timed encounter, you were operating on patterns, habits, expectations, maybe even survival. You were making choices based on what made sense on the surface, not what resonated at your core. But Jay disrupted that pattern. And disruption, as uncomfortable as it is often the beginning of transformation. You weren't meant to stay comfortable in a space that was quietly disconnecting you from who you truly are. You weren't meant to continue down a path that required you to ignore your own instincts just to maintain a sense of stability. That kind of stability is fragile. It only works as long as you don't question it. And the moment you do, everything starts to unravel, not to destroy you, but to reveal what was never meant to hold you in the first place. That's why the timing matters so much. You weren't interrupted at a random point. You were interrupted at a critical point. A moment where one decision could have reinforced the version of you that was settling or awakened the version of you that was ready for something real. And you felt that tension. You felt the pull between what was easy and what was true. And in the middle of that tension, Jay appeared not to pull you in one direction, but to make you aware that you even had a choice. Because before awareness, there is no real choice-only reaction. But now you're no longer reacting blindly. Now you're seeing, and seeing changes everything. It changes how you interpret your own emotions. It changes how you understand your past decisions. It even changes how you view the people around you. You start to notice patterns you didn't notice before. You start to recognize when something feels forced, when something feels genuine, when something aligns, and when something quietly drains you. This level of awareness can feel isolating at times, because not everyone around you is operating at the same depth of perception. Not everyone is questioning the same things. Not everyone is willing to pause and reflect instead of rushing forward. And that can make you feel like you're standing still while everything else keeps moving. But you're not standing still. You're becoming intentional. And intention is what separates a life lived by default from a life lived with purpose. Jay didn't give you purpose. They reminded you that you already had it, you just weren't fully connected to it yet. And sometimes all it takes is one moment, one person, one unexpected interaction to bring that connection back into focus. That's what makes this experience so difficult to explain to others, because from the outside, it might not look significant. It might seem like just another conversation, just another encounter, just another passing moment. But you know it wasn't. You felt the shift. You felt the way your thoughts paused in a way they never had before. You felt the way your perspective opened, even if just slightly. You felt the way something inside you said, "Pay attention, this matters." And that inner voice, that instinct, is something you're starting to trust more now. Before, you might have ignored it. Before, you might have overridden it with logic, with fear, with the desire to keep things simple. But now ignoring it feels different. Now ignoring it feels like betraying yourself. And that's a powerful place to be. Because when you reach a point where you value your inner truth more than external comfort, your decisions begin to change in ways that shape your entire future. You start choosing differently, not because someone told you to, but because you feel the difference. You start walking away from things that no longer align, even if they once felt right. You start leaning into uncertainty, not because it's easy, but because it feels more honest than staying in something that no longer resonates. And that honesty, that raw, sometimes uncomfortable honesty, is where real growth begins. Jay didn't plant that honesty in you. They revealed it. They brought it to the surface at the exact moment you were about to bury it under another decision that would have taken you further away from yourself. And now that it's surfaced, it's asking something from you. Not perfection, not immediate clarity, but alignment. Alignment in your choices, alignment in your actions, alignment in the way you respond to the life unfolding around you. Because awareness without action eventually becomes frustration. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unknow what you now understand. And trying to go back to who you were before will only create tension within you. That tension isn't there to punish you. It's there to guide you. It's there to remind you every time you're about to ignore your instincts again that you've already experienced what happens when you don't listen. And now you have the chance to do something different. Not because everything is clear, not because you have all the answers, but because you're finally connected to the part of yourself that recognizes truth when it appears, even if it arrives in an unexpected form, through an unexpected person, at an unexpected moment. That's what made Jay so impactful. It wasn't about who they were in a conventional sense. It was about what they represented in that exact moment of your life. They represented interruption. They represented awareness. They represented the possibility that you didn't have to continue down a path just because you had already started walking it. And that possibility is something you carry with you now, in every decision, in every hesitation, in every moment where you feel that quiet inner voice asking you to pause, to reflect, to choose differently. You don't need Jay to appear again for that awareness to exist, because it was never about them staying. It was about you seeing. And once you see, you begin to move differently, even if it's subtle at first. You begin to notice when something doesn't feel right, even if you can't immediately explain why. You begin to sense when a choice is being driven by fear instead of alignment. You begin to recognize when you're about to repeat a pattern that no longer serves you. And in those moments, you have a decision to make. Not the same kind of unconscious decision you were about to make before, but a conscious one. A choice that comes from awareness instead of habit. A choice that reflects who you're becoming, not just who you've been. And that's where the real shift happens. Not in the moment Jay appeared, but in every moment after, where you choose to honor what that experience revealed to you. Because that's how transformation works. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in layers. in small, seemingly insignificant choices that over time build a completely different direction. And you're in that process now, even if it doesn't feel dramatic, even if it doesn't feel certain, even if it feels slow and uncomfortable and unfamiliar. You're not where you were before. And you're not going back to that version of yourself, not fully, not completely. Because something in you has already crossed a threshold of awareness, a threshold of honesty, a threshold of recognizing that your life is shaped not just by what happens to you, but by how consciously you respond to it. And that realization, that quiet but powerful realization, is what Jay left you with. Not as a memory to hold on to, but as a truth to live from. And the more you lean into that truth, the more your path begins to shift in ways that align with who you actually are, not who you thought you had to be. That alignment might not always feel easy. In fact, it often requires letting go of things that once felt secure. It often requires stepping into uncertainty without guarantees. It often requires trusting yourself in ways you haven't fully practiced yet. But that's the direction you're being pulled toward now. Not by force, not by pressure, but by a deeper sense of knowing that was activated in you at the exact moment you were about to choose something that didn't reflect your truth. And that knowing isn't fading, it's growing, quietly, steadily, becoming stronger each time you listen to it instead of dismissing it, becoming clearer each time you act on it instead of ignoring it, becoming more undeniable each time you recognize that your life begins to feel more aligned when you follow it. And that's where this moment continues to unfold, not as something that already happened and is now over, but as something that is still shaping you, still influencing you, still guiding you in ways you're only beginning to understand. Because the impact of that encounter wasn't limited to that single moment. It extended into everything that came after, into the way you think, into the way you feel, into the way you're starting to approach your own life with a level of awareness that wasn't fully present before. And that awareness, it's not temporary. It's not something you'll just forget and move on from. It's something that's becoming part of you, part of how you navigate, part of how you choose, part of how you recognize the difference between what's meant for you and what simply crosses your path. And the more you pay attention to that difference, the more you realize that your life isn't as random as it once seemed. That moments like the one you experienced don't just happen without reason. That people like Jay don't just appear without purpose. They arrive with precision, they leave with impact, and they stay not in presence but in the awareness they awaken within you. And that awareness is still speaking to you now. And that awareness is still speaking to you now. Not in loud declarations, not in overwhelming certainty, but in quiet, signals that ask you to slow down just enough to notice. It shows up in the moments where something feels slightly off, even if everything looks right on the surface. It appears when you're about to say yes, but something inside you hesitates. It lingers when you reflect on your choices and realize you're no longer the version of yourself who could move forward without questioning. That voice, that awareness is the continuation of what Jay started, because what began as an interruption has now become an internal compass, and the more you listen to it, the more it refines you. You're starting to understand that not every opportunity is meant to be taken, not every connection is meant to be kept, and not every path is meant to be followed just because it's available. You're beginning to see that alignment is not about chasing what looks good, it's about recognizing what feels true, even when it's less obvious, less immediate, less comfortable. And that shift, it changes the way you, live. It slows you down in the best way, not into hesitation, but into awareness. You begin to move with intention instead of urgency. You begin to choose with clarity instead of pressure. You begin to trust that what is truly meant for you won't require you to abandon yourself to receive it. That's the deeper message hidden inside that moment. You were never meant to lose yourself just to move forward. You were meant to become more of yourself before taking the next step. And Jay arrived at the exact second you needed to realize that. Not to stop your journey, but to realign it. Not to confuse you, but to wake you up. Not to stay, but to ensure that when they left, you wouldn't return to the same unconscious patterns that were quietly pulling you away from your truth. And now, here you are, more aware, more present, more connected to something within you that refuses to be ignored. You might not have every answer yet. You might still feel the weight of uncertainty. You might still be figuring out what this all means for the road ahead. But one thing is clear: you are no longer moving blindly. You are no longer choosing without awareness. You are no longer the same person who stood at that moment, about to make a decision without fully seeing it. Something in you has sharpened. Something in you has awakened. And that awakening didn't come to make your life harder, it came to make your path truer. Because the right path isn't always the easiest one to recognize, but it's the one that doesn't ask you to ignore yourself to walk it. And now you can feel that difference. You can sense it in your choices. You can recognize it in your pauses. You can trust it in a way you couldn't before. That's the real shift. That's the real reason Jay was sent to you at that exact moment. Not just to change what you were about to choose, but to change how you choose from that moment forward. And that is something that doesn't fade. It doesn't disappear with time. It becomes part of you, guiding you, correcting you, reminding you again and again that your life begins to align the moment you start listening to what you've always felt, but never fully followed. And now you are listening.